Today I have the honor and privilege of welcoming you to week 12. I can't help but think that you are approaching this week's class with a profound sense of accomplishment. This will be your final week on phase 2 of the PRISM weight loss program. Isn't that incredible? Do you remember the very first class you attended? Standing at the beginning of a very long path, your weight loss journey may have appeared endless, difficult, and uncertain. If you tried to imagine your 3-month mark back then, it must have seemed more like 3 years. But here you are. You look and feel wonderful, and the future looks bright and full of promise. Your time and effort expended to this point has paid off. When people look at you, they can see you've made some changes. But the inside is where the real transformation is taking place. And even if no one else has noticed yet, your attitudes are changing. More than anyone else, you are aware that you truly are becoming the person God created you to be. Have you given much thought to how the food we eat today compares to what our great-grandparents ate? How has food changed in the last 100 years, and what effect do these changes have on our physical, emotional, and mental health? How does extreme dieting create problems for our thyroid? What can we do about food cravings or binge eating? Is the standard American diet responsible for increased eating disorders and depression? To address these and many more topics, we welcome back Carol Simon-Tachi. Earlier in the PRISM program, we called on Carol to answer our questions about carbohydrates. Today, we will once again be blessed by her wisdom as she discusses her book, The Crazy Makers: How the Food Industry is Destroying Our Brains and Harming Our Children. A certified clinical nutritionist, Carol has authored a number of books on nutrition, including Your Fat Is Not Your Fault. She also hosts Here's to Your Health, Your Nutrition Coach, a nationally syndicated radio show aired on more than 50 stations. And she writes an online column for Vitalcast.com. Here now is Carol Simon-Tachi.
Several years ago, I was sitting in my office and the title of a book came into my mind. And then I got the theme of the book. And then I like to say that God sent me to school to teach me about the book. The name of the book is The Crazy Makers. The theme is how the American food industry is physically destroying our brains. And then the school that I went to were the people that I began working with who are struggling with mental illness of all types. What am I talking about when I talk about mental illness? And what is happening around the world? We are seeing an epidemic of mental illness in just about every form. In some states, suicide is now the number 2 cause of death among children and teenagers and among the elderly. We're seeing a huge increase in eating disorders, in depression, in obsessive-compulsive disorders, in social phobias. Well, the list goes on. And now they're making cherry-flavored Prozac so they can start children on antidepressant drugs at a very young age. What is going on? But you know, the real question is, what is going on with you? How do you feel? Are you depressed? Are you struggling with binge eating episodes? Do you crave inappropriate foods that you know you shouldn't be eating? Are you hungry all the time? Do you have trouble sleeping at night? Anger. How about your levels of anger and depression and fears, unwarranted fears? Now, you see, we don't often talk about these things when we're talking about dieting, and this is a series on dieting after all, isn't it? And yet what I'm going to talk about in this segment really brings those two subjects together because they really are related. How are we going to relate those? Well, let's talk about the American food industry. Let's talk about the American food culture, about what your ancestors ate and what you are eating, and let's see if we can pull these themes together in a coherent manner. Now, when we talk about the foods that your parents ate, it in no way resembled what you and I are eating today. When they ate food, they went out and wrestled it from the rivers. They hunted it in the fields. They pulled it out of the garden. They plucked it out of their gardens, washed it off under the garden tap, and they munched on it. They ate food that was seasonal. They ate food that was regional. They ate food that was, for the most part, organic, at least up until the last 100 years or so. They ate food that was appropriate to their climate, to season of year, and so on. But today, what we eat are packages and boxes and frozen things and names that we cannot even begin to pronounce, let alone talk about what they do to the human body. No, food has really changed. And in that change of food, it's making a change in our brains, and it's actually leading us into behaviors over which we have little control. Now let's talk about, for example, the problem of eating disorders and binge eating episodes and cravings for inappropriate foods. Let's get really personal about this because, you see, for people who are on diets, these are very common themes. We don't talk about them a lot. We don't talk about binge eating episodes, and yet when I have interviewed people who are dieting or have dieted over the past few years, I find that in the secret hiding places of their homes, in the secret times when nobody is watching, they really do engage in binge eating episodes over which they feel they have no control. Now, what am I talking about when I talk about binge eating episodes? I'm talking about eating huge amounts of foods that you're not hungry for, you don't want. You feel full, you feel sick at heart, but you eat this huge amount of foods in a very short period of time. You feel compelled to eat it, driven by some inner force over which you have almost no control. What about food cravings? Now let's get really personal. How about chocolate cravings and sugar cravings and cravings for bread and pasta? How about craving for carbonated beverages of any kind? Cravings for salty foods, dairy products, ice cream. Well, this is where it gets really personal, isn't it? Because even though we like to say no to those foods, and most of the time we do, there are times in our lives when we are driven to eat them by some inner compulsion over which we have no control. Now, is it your self-will? Is it that you lack self-will? Are you really weak-willed, can't control it? If you talk to some people, they'll say, I'm strong. I can turn those away at any moment. And others of us say, no, at times we really do struggle with those. We have to understand that when we are driven to eat compulsively, when we are driven to eat foods that we really don't want, our bodies are giving us a message. And I'm going to try to help you understand those messages today, because once you begin to understand the messages, you really are not in bondage to those episodes anymore. Now, when we look at the foods that we are consuming today on a regular basis, we're talking about not really foods, we're talking about pseudo-foods. I'm talking about food artifacts that are causing an epidemic of hunger in our culture. We talk about hunger in our culture as an issue of poverty. And that is a problem in some parts of the country. Some economic parts of the world, we have difficulties with hunger simply because there's not enough money to purchase food. That's not the kind of hunger I'm talking about. I'm talking about a hunger that is not satisfied on 1,200 calories a day, a hunger that is not satisfied on 1,800 calories a day, 2,000 calories a day. I'm talking about a hunger that is driven by the fact that we are not eating foods that provide the very structural building blocks of a healthy brain, that are not providing the nutrients needed for the body. What is hunger, after all? Are we hungry because we don't have enough food to put in our stomach? Are we hungry because our tummies are growling because we don't have enough calories? No, primarily we're hungry because we're not eating enough protein, enough carbohydrates of the unrefined kind. We're not eating enough vitamins and minerals. And so our bodies are never satisfied. Hunger is the body's way of saying, I'm not satisfied. My needs are not being met. And it's almost irrelevant how much we have eaten. Have you ever found that after sitting down to a meal, eating maybe 500, 800 calories, you're not satisfied? You're still hungry. Now your stomach is full, and you know you really don't need to eat more. You've eaten enough calories, but you're not satisfied. You're hungry. I like to tell dieters that we do not want to disconnect ourselves from that hunger. We don't want to shut those hunger signals off, because those hunger signals are sent there by a healthy body. They're a God-given way of saying, you're not eating the right kind of food. Your body is not being satisfied. There's a scripture verse that I like to refer to often when I'm talking to dieters. It's a scripture that's found in Isaiah 55:2 that says, "Why do you eat that which is not bread? Why do you spend your money for that which does not satisfy?" But that's what we're doing here in our culture. We're eating foods that do not satisfy, and so we're always hungry. What does that have to do with mental illness? What does that have to do with binge eating episodes, with food cravings? What does that have to do with depression and fears? Well, again, we're talking about messages that your body is sending to you saying, "Give me what I need and I'll be satisfied. I will not need to binge eat if my needs are being met." There were some interesting studies that were conducted after World War II on prisoners of war, people who had been incarcerated in prison of war camps over a period of time until they had lost about 25% of their body weight. They were down to now 75% of normal, starving to death, literally. After they were released from the prison of war, these people were given food to eat. They quickly regained their weight back up to a normal weight. But there was one thing that had changed forever about them. And that was, from that point on, they were given to episodes of binge eating over which they had little control. It seemed that their body was crying out for something that was not being met. To replicate this, they took some students and put them in a room and starved them basically down to about 75% of normal weight. Now, these were healthy college kids. At the end of this period of time, they turned them loose in the school cafeteria and allowed them to indulge freely, and of course, they quickly regained back up to normal weight again. But again, there was one thing that had changed about these students, and that was, again, they seemed at times compelled to eat even when they did not want to eat. What is it about that period of starvation that had changed their body chemistry? Researchers speculate that it may be that during that period of starvation, their thyroid gland had shut down. It was operating at a much lower level. Possibly their body was worried about going into another period of starvation, so it wanted to build up a little excess weight. Who knows? But the reality was, those episodes of binge eating were not driven by lack of self-will. It wasn't because they were weak-willed ninnies. It was because they had gone through periods of starvation. Now, it's unlikely that any of you listening to us today have been incarcerated in a concentration camp, thank goodness. What is it that you do that is similar, however, to that experience? You diet. You reduce your calories down to what the body perceives as near starvation levels. You are hungry, chronically hungry. And the speculation is then that that period of dieting, of bringing those calories down too low, actually lowers your thyroid or sets your body up for believing that you are starving to death, and it has to put a little extra padding on to make sure that you're not going to die. It's your body's way of protecting you. What about food cravings? Well, again, let's bring that discussion down to simple malnutrition, because those food craving episodes are actually driven by malnutrition. For example, you'll find that when you are craving chocolate, in all likelihood, it's not because it's too much stress and you're wanting that comfort food. It's because you're magnesium deficient. About 60% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. Now, I want to describe the symptoms of magnesium deficient because it is so common, especially in the dieting population, that I know a lot of you are going to recognize yourself in this picture. Some of the symptoms of magnesium deficiency are short-term memory loss, easily depressed or discouraged, emotional ups and downs, inappropriate cravings for chocolate and other sugars, palpitations of the heart, anxiety, panic attacks, nervous attacks, palpitations of the heart, muscle tremors and twitches, and that's when your eye twitches a little, you can hardly control it, or just before you drop off to sleep at night, your whole body convulses. Fatigue. I always miss a couple of them, so I must be a little magnesium deficient myself. But that craving for chocolate and sweets it seems to hit so many of us. Some people, though, they don't care about chocolate. Give them salty foods, and they binge on salty foods. Me, if I were going to have an inappropriate food craving, it would be for salty foods. But guess what? Not all the time. When I crave salty foods, it's because I'm under stress. And people who crave potato chips, pickles, olives, anything with salt in it, are typically people whose adrenal glands are exhausted and they're tired. It's the body's way of boosting energy because salt and potassium, another essential mineral, are used to produce cellular energy. And I always find that people who crave salty foods are people under stress, people who need to rest. What about craving fatty foods? That's another one that gets us a lot. Ice cream, fried chicken, anything with a little grease in it, that's what we want. The signal that your body is sending you is if you are eating fatty foods, you really crave the fatty foods, typically it's because you're deficient in essential fatty acids. In other words, fats that are absolutely necessary to the body that you're just not getting enough of. Your body is saying, give me fatty acids, and you're interpreting that to mean, give me fried chicken. I don't want you to go out eating fried chicken and hamburgers and the French fries that accompany those. That's not the fatty foods that is going to satisfy that craving. The types of fatty foods that will satisfy that craving would be things like avocados, raw nuts and seeds, having fish 2-3 times a week, eating those wonderful olive oil dressings that are so good on your salads. That will actually satisfy that craving for fatty foods, and you won't need to go for the ice cream anymore. We can say the same thing about coffee. Sometimes people are addicted to coffee. You know, coffee is the #1 psychoactive drug in this country, and the use of coffee is growing exponentially. Why are we so fixated on coffee? It's a way of getting our energy back up again. It's our body's way of saying, I'm tired, I need to rest. But instead of resting, we reach for a cup of coffee. Do you see how those messages can be pulled together? And instead of then us reaching for those craving, those foods that are so inappropriate to us, we can reach for something that are actually going to satisfy the needs of the body. Now, how does this correlate to what we are eating today? What types of foods are we going to put on the table that are going to eliminate some of those problems of binge eating episodes and the cravings for inappropriate food? What are good foods? And I would like to pull you then back to a discussion about what foods your ancestors ate, foods that your body was designed to enjoy. Because once you satisfy that inner hunger, once you're not hungry anymore, you will not need to eat very much food until those needs are satisfied. What is it that you're going to eat then? What are you going to put on the table for breakfast this morning or for dinner tonight? I like to draw you back to eating several servings of fresh fish every single week, having some good sources of protein with every single meal, eating eggs, eating a little bit of beef, eating the low-fat types of chicken and so on. You want to provide those essential amino acids that are so good for the brain. You want to be eating the essential oils. And I do not believe that we want to go on a low-fat diet. God did not design food as low-fat. He distributed fat abundantly throughout the food chain. Why? Because those essential fats are absolutely necessary to your health and your happiness. Studies have shown that a deficiency in essential fatty acid is actually driving much of the increase in depression. And so we want to get those essential fats in the diet. Where? From, of course, your deep sea fish, but also you want to eat the avocados. You want to have an olive oil dressing on your salad. You want to snack on raw nuts and seeds. You want to make sure that you're eating butter on your baked potato instead of margarine on your baked potato, because you see, those are natural fats that your body appreciates and it builds health from. You know, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on this issue of the low-fat diet, because we have been really deceived into thinking that we simply must get the fat out of our diet if we are going to be healthy. And that alone is driving much of the depression, some of the learning problems, memory problems, hormonal problems. It goes right to the very heart of our health, because fat is such an essential part of our health and happiness. Many of those fats that we need to include in the diet on a daily basis are structural fats. They are used to build hormones. They're used to maintain the integrity of the cell membrane and the nervous system and for every cell in the body. Those fats are absolutely necessary to provide energy for the heart and to a lesser degree, the rest of the body. So you do not want to go on a low-fat diet. We want to make sure that we're getting the unrefined carbohydrates, because as we're providing our body with lots of fruits and lots of vegetables, Not the kind that come in packages and boxes, but I'm talking about the kind that are found in your fresh produce section of your supermarket. Those unrefined carbohydrates provide rich energy to fuel the energy-hungry brain and the energy-hungry heart, and to provide energy for every other cell in your body. And don't kid yourself, a lot of times the reason we're craving sugary foods is because we're energy deficient. Our bodies are starving for a good source of energy, and you want to get that energy from your fresh fruits and vegetables. Now let's talk secondarily about vitamins and minerals. If you had lived back, say 100 years ago, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago, you would have worked physically very, very hard, out in the fields, tending the house, the children. You would have burned 3,000 calories, 5,000, 8,000 calories a day just in the course of daily living. And so to provide those calories, you're going to be eating a lot of fruits and vegetables and fish and so on. You're just going to eat a large volume of food to provide that energy. You don't work that hard anymore. We're kind of sedentary in our culture. So you can get by on a lot fewer calories. You're not eating the volume of food, which means then you're not getting the amount of minerals and vitamins needed, again, to provide for the needs of the body. What are those vitamins and minerals used for? Vitamins and minerals are used to catalyze hundreds of thousands of enzymes throughout the body. There's about 300,000 different types of protein bodies created within your own body, and those are driven for the large part by vitamins and minerals. We don't get very many of those today. The average American eats about 2 servings of raw fruits and vegetables per day. Not raw, just fruits and vegetables. And about 1/4 of those servings is in the form of French fries. So we're not getting a lot of vitamins and minerals in our food. And that's why, again, we're struggling with deficiencies that are causing cravings and binge eating episodes. Now, B-complex, for example, is absolutely necessary to prevent depression, to prevent a lot of skin disorders, to prevent problems in metabolizing the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, because B-complex is used to break those down in the digestive process and to metabolize them in the cell. Zinc is another essential mineral that is absolutely necessary for brain function. About 200 enzymes in the brain alone are driven by zinc. The average American woman gets about 6 to 8 milligrams of zinc per day, when nutritionists believe that we need about 25 to 30 milligrams of zinc per day. What are some of the symptoms of zinc deficiency?